Welcome everybody. Welcome to all the members of the Mission Oriented Innovation Network of IIPP, those of you from the Beyond 4.0 team who are joining us today, and everybody else who's with us for the webinar. I'm Tamsin Murray Leach. I'm a PhD student here at IIPP, and I've worked with our speaker today, Carlota Perez, for a number of years. Carlota's over there. Wave hello to people. Carlota's going to be getting the slides ready while I do all the practical introductory stuff. I'll also hopefully field lots of questions from you at the end. This session is in the webinar format, so unfortunately we won't be able to talk with you directly, but do put questions in the Q&A box down at the bottom. I think you've all done this before as we go along, and Carlota will endeavour to answer them all in the last 20 minutes of the session. For those of you who haven't seen Carlota speak before, I should tell you that she's honorary professor here at IIPP, where she advises, argues with Mariana. She teaches on both the MPA programme and the undergraduate Rethinking Capitalism course. She's also Professor of Technology and Development at Technology University of Tallinn and Honorary Professor at SPRU, the Science and Technology Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. She's also Academic in Residence at Anthemis UK, who do innovative fintech venture capital. Having worked in civil service focused on innovation for many years, beginning in her native Venezuela, she made the switch to academia and consulting in the late 80s and continues even through the pandemic. In fact, I think she'd say that the pandemic has helped her to do this, to consult globally. She's imparted her wisdom to everyone from the OECD to IBM, and you can see a whole range of podcasts and videos on her website, which is www.carlotaperez.org, not co.uk, org. Her prescient book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, The Dynamics of Bubbles and Golden Ages, which was published in 2002, has been highly influential, particularly in the world of fintech and startups. And although it's not the focus of her talk today, she's written extensively on developing a paradigm for smart green growth that's globally equitable, in particular challenging the resource curse narrative around developing countries and promoting the growth of sustainable down and upstream R&D and extraction and production processes in the country of origin. Now, the topic today might seem like a little bit of an outlier in the series, which focuses on mission-oriented policy to tackle the climate crisis. But actually, the aim of this session is to go back to the roots to ask why. Why do we focus on mission-oriented policy? And what makes many of you, and definitely including Carlota, convinced that not only is mission-oriented policy necessary in facing the climate crisis and other environmental degradation, but that the climate crisis itself needs to be looked at as an opportunity rather than a threat. Now, Carlota's written extensively on this, on the current moment as an opportunity that has the power to transform our economy and our society for the better, tackling not just the environmental threats, but all the issues we face today: inequality, unemployment, social unrest. It sounds utopian. I know a lot of people level that at her work. Yet since the start of industrialization, we've had periods of relative peace and prosperity that have followed on tumultuous times like the one we're currently experiencing. And by now, most of you are probably at least vaguely familiar with the notion of technological revolutions and the idea that we're currently in a key moment of one. At a gathering like this a decade ago, that probably wouldn't have been the case. But Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum has done a great job of popularizing this notion of Industry 4.0, a paradigmatic shift in technologies and consequently in how we work. And Carlota, if you could do the next slide. This is where I get to explain to you where the title of this talk, Beyond 4.0, comes from. Beyond 4.0 is a consortium project that IIPP is currently working on for the EU, alongside 8 other universities and innovation research bodies across Europe. The aim of Beyond 4.0 is to help the EU deliver an inclusive European future by examining the impact of these so-called Industry 4.0 technologies on the future of jobs, business models and welfare. It's part of the EU's H2020 programme, which has funded a huge raft of studies looking at how to help European societies become inclusive, innovative and reflective. Now, the project began just before the COVID-19 pandemic and before Britain left the EU. The latter we can't really get into here, but Carlota would argue that the pandemic has only highlighted the tumultuousness of the moment in which we are now and the dire need for policy that recognises the power of the state to transform society. But again, in order to understand the whys of the future, which after all come before the hows, it can help to look at the past, to understand technological transformations, how they've occurred and their impact. And that's the contribution of the research led by Carlota here at IIPP. Today, Carlota will be focusing primarily on the first output of this research, the historical background paper of the project, entitled Technological Revolutions, Which Ones, How Many and Why It Matters, a Neo-Schumpeterian View. It can be found on the project website and the address is up there. But before Carlota speaks, I'm going to very briefly discuss the methodologies behind this research. Now, one of the things we've done in this first paper is to really interrogate this term Industry 4.0 and the study of technological revolutions over the years. This notion that we're in a fourth industrial revolution is one that Schwab has popularized, but there have been so many different periodizations over the years emerging from a variety of academic disciplines, economics, history, business management, engineering, and focused on different aspects of economic and technical change. Are we in a second machine age, a third industrial upheaval, a fifth Kondratiev wave? So our starting point was to carry out a systematic review of the scholarship and of the popular discourse that has periodized technological change. Now, often such systematic reviews pick a search term or a number of them and limit themselves to one or more academic databases. But we believe that this really only tells part of the story. And what masquerades as objective empirical research can end up obscuring as much as it reveals. For one thing, you have to come from some place of subjectivity to know which works are relevant. In this case, for example, works dealing with the Industrial Revolution are likely to have a very different focus to those that study multiple industrial revolutions. And then there are the journal criteria which can mask the source of influential ideas, so that Schwab himself, for example, who published his work in a World Economic Forum pamphlet and then a popular Penguin book, hardly appears in the academic databases. And yet younger scholars using his concept as a given are numerous. So while we mapped out the most popular and most cited articles and authors in the Web of Science, Scopus, EconLit, there's a list on the slide before, and from that mapping did a deep dive into the indexes of the most relevant individual journals, we also analysed the results of Google Books and Scholar, because it has such a huge database of works. I think it's 40 million and counting. We studied Amazon rankings to help gauge popular works on the topic in the present time. And we borrowed the work of colleagues at Sprue, who are tracking popular terms and concepts across the 175 years of the popular magazine Scientific American. And we cross-checked the most popular and most highly cited works returned for each decade across all these different publications to track the changing focus of interest in technological and industrial revolutions over time. And what we found was that interest has changed dramatically across time and disciplines, and depending on the techno-economic context. Next slide, please. So if we look at this, we can see that technological revolutions, industrial revolutions are slippery concepts. This is a Google Ngram. It's the results of the millions of books, magazines, and government publications in the Google corpora, looking at the discourse around industrial and technological revolutions. And this one shows the single and the plural over time. You can see that after massive interest in the Gilded Age in the 1920s, and then post-war during the heyday of the mass production revolution, it drops off considerably until interest starts to pick up again in the early 2000s. Next slide, please. And then this Ngram adds industry, spelt both ways, 4.0 to the mix, which, as you can see, over the past 7 years has shot up, dwarfing the others. And when we were carrying out our systematic review of the content of the works, we found that where once, say, Kondratiev waves were fashionable in a certain quarter of economic scholarship, Industry 4.0 is now routinely used across multiple disciplines with next to no interrogation of the concept. So this was the jumping off point for our paper. What makes a technological revolution? Says who and how many have there really been? And can you even say this empirically, or is the notion just a useful theoretical framework? And if that's the case, which frame do you choose? Fortunately for me, I'm now going to pass over to Carlota, who's going to do the hard work of providing some of the answers. Thank you, Carlota.
To talk to you about the policy shaping of innovation towards green and inclusive economies, but rejecting technological determinism. So the first question is, which revolution, as Tamsin was saying before, which revolution are we in? And especially, why does it matter? Then we'll look at the historical pattern identified by the Neo-Schumpeterians, of course, of which I am one. Then the policy tools for financial and government shaping, which is something that interests MOIN very much. And then the question of whether we can get to a smart, green, fair, and global golden age, taking advantage of historical experience. Okay, so which revolution are we in now? We want to know who holds the idea and what is observed and analyzed, because some people say we're in the second, some in the third, fourth, fifth, even sixth revolution. But they are all right, because it depends what they're looking at. I mean, there is no one definition. So the people who hold it's the second, like MIT's Brynjolfsson and McAfee, they are thinking of the nature of the work that's being mechanized. So they say we're going from manual work to mental work. Johan Schott, who leads the influential Deep Transitions project, for him and for the team, the transition to environmental and social sustainability is comparable to going from agriculture to industry with the Industrial Revolution. So that's another valid way to look at it. Then the people who think it's the third, Robert Gordon, for instance, an economist, his problem is productivity and the level of change in quality of life. So putting those two things together, he sees three revolutions. Many economic historians take advantage or look at the major geopolitical and power changes and the important technologies associated with them. So somehow they're not really talking about technological revolutions, but they're talking about major geopolitical revolutions. And now we come to the fourth, which we've been talking about, which is the World Economic Forum, the Davos meeting people led by Klaus Schwab. They are very much, they actually call it industrial revolution because their whole thing is how technology systems have a major impact on industry. But those of us who see it as the fifth, the Neo-Schumpeterians as myself, we see it as the interaction of technology, economics, politics, policy, culture, and social progress. So it's really a major transition, and we have to look at all the things to make sure we're talking about a proper revolution. The neo-Marxists, of course, look at major socio-political changes. They also see the fifth, and long-wave theorists see upswings and downswings in GDP, long-term ones, but not necessarily resulting from technical change. The one that did that was Schumpeter, who really saw it that way. So the thing is that only by including socio-political transitions in the analysis can we avoid technological determinism. So the thing is that different technologies, different theories about technology have different socio-political consequences. If we look at the current techno-pessimists who think this is, robots are coming, jobs will be finished, we're nowhere, technology is destroying everything, they see it as an unavoidable threat. So they say, we need to protect the victims. But the optimists, they say, no, don't worry, see them as promising growth and progress, let the market act, we'll get it all. Well, the Industry 4.0 people combine the two in an intelligent way. They actually do see creative destruction. They accept and celebrate the inexorable future. They sort of think, yes, the change is coming. They promote its progress. They propose ways to diminish dangers and encourage business to take the lead. That was the basic Davos message. Worry about the stakeholders. Davos was about this whole change. But the Neo-Schumpeterians see all technological revolutions as processes of creative destruction. We think they require vast innovation and investment guided by strong and proactive government action to shape the context and give direction for the best socioeconomic outcome. And this is where we're being joined now by the WEF people. With their post-COVID reset book, they see the UN SDGs as goals, the technologies as the means to achieve them, while business, citizens, and governments should be the shaping agents all together. So we are coming to a sort of consensus. It's growing, the consensus on the need to shape the technologies by proactive governments. So I'm going to give you a sense of the historical patterns identified by the Neo-Schumpeterians, just briefly. The Neo-Schumpeterian understanding of technological revolutions identifies 5 of them in the past 250 years. And note it's technological, not industrial. The Industrial Revolution, the original one, machines, factories, and canals. Then the age of steam, coal, iron, and railways. Then the first globalization, the third revolution, the age of steel and heavy engineering, electrical, chemical, civil, naval. That's the time when really the whole world sort of came into capitalism. Then the age of the automobile, oil, plastics, and mass production, which is the one we're trying to get rid of, and the age of information technology and telecommunications, which to us is halfway along. And each of them brings a great surge of development. So it just picks up, increases productivity across the board in the countries where it is developing, where it is diffusing. And it provides a new paradigm for innovation, productivity, and profitability. So it really changes the conditions under which markets work, but then we need to shape those conditions so they go in the best direction. So the diffusion of each great surge, how does it happen? It follows a regular pattern. The gestation happens during the previous revolution, then it starts slowly, then it goes much faster because everybody learns how to do it, and finally it reaches maturity. Like every effort, you get to the point where you can't go again. And it overlaps, they overlap at the beginning and at the end. So the first period, the early decades, the ones we have been seeing, are the installation period of experimental spread, and they tend to end in financial bubbles and crashes. Then there is the turning point, which is a recession after the crashes, and then a golden age, the golden age decades, the deployment period, synergistic spread, where if we look at the installation period, we see that it's a turbulent and unequal process of creative destruction. That's the term that Schumpeter used. Technology spreads in many directions in ferocious competition, forcing the new paradigm against the old. During the turning point, we have instability and uncertainty in the economy, social unrest, and resentment and populism politically. So to overcome that, a proactive state modernizes itself with all these technologies and sets a win-win game between business and society. This doesn't have to happen, but we hope it will. It has happened historically in almost every one of these countries. Creative construction, because they come in synergy. Industry develops, all industry services activities tend to follow, including government and all organizations tend to follow the new paradigm. So technology spreads in common directions, guided by regulated competition, which is the role of the state. So we are here. We have hope. We could go ahead. We are at the crucial moment when the new technologies are sufficiently developed, their paradigm and potential are sufficiently understood for governments to tilt the playing field. Technology only sets the stage. Then society engages in conflicts and compromises because it's not easy. Of course, we don't agree. Everybody has different interests. So the idea is to give direction and define the social context for the future, but the shaping is very political. What are the policy tools now for financial and government shaping? Okay, it's different in the two periods, the shaping of investment, adoption, and innovation. Finance and markets shape the initial adoption of technology through fierce competition, you change or you die, intensive speculation, supporting copycat innovation, provision of or denial of credit, new technologies adopted in finance itself, promoting mergers and acquisitions, tending towards monopoly, and so on. They all increase as major successes and gains give greater confidence. So they feel that they're really geniuses and they're doing the whole thing and they go haywire in any direction. How do governments redirect and shape it? Well, they use Pigovian taxes and tariffs, so they tax the bads and tariffs and put tariffs on the bads and then favor the goods. Regulation, treaties, and geopolitics, changing hours of work, wages, and other conditions, new infrastructure provision, public investment in R&D and innovation, education and training, strengthening the unions, adoption of the new technologies in government, major public projects and procurement, the missions that you know a lot about, favoring lifestyle changes, and so on. all providing an implicit or explicit direction enhanced by the resulting change in the relative cost structure. So golden ages have historically been unleashed by those policy directions shaping successive technological revolutions. So let's now look at the golden ages of each revolution. The first one, when the UK was the only one, it made the leap ahead and had victory in the Napoleonic War. Guess what the direction was? War procurement, win the war, transport and agriculture. That was what they wanted, to win the war. The second, from 1851, was the Victorian boom. So what was the idea? Well, the directions were become the workshop of the world. So they exported textiles and machinery and things, and not machinery, actually, they kept it, and urbanization. So that's the time when cities grew, Manchester and Leeds and all the major industrial cities. Then the third revolution from 1900, the Belle Epoque actually, the UK was the Pax Britannica, so they wanted global free markets. The pound sterling ruled the empire and the world, and let me tell you, UK didn't really get a golden age because they didn't really help industry. They helped finance mainly and the whole trade, services, and so on. But the US, which was catching up, wanted a single national market. So they wanted it protected from imports and operating in free competition inside borders. So they did many things. They, especially the railways, get the railways together and education and so on. And the other thing was progress, social, scientific, technical, organizational, and economic. So those were goals then. And Germany, again, also catching up in the Belle Epoque, industrialization, high-tech capital goods, and cooperation, cartels and cooperatives at all levels for negotiation. This is a very interesting experience that we should all study because I think it could be useful for our times too. They actually, cartels, which were everywhere seen as, you know, you're against competition or something, the Supreme Court of Germany declared them good, no problem. This doesn't harm anybody. It's good to protect the prices, to protect the industrial, because they were interested in industrialization. So you fit your directions and your policies to those goals. And the fourth, of course, US and Europe was the post-war boom. So the directions were suburbanization, consumerism, and the Cold War. So, of course, Germany and Japan couldn't have Cold War military things, so they did mainly capital goods. But they had clear directions in which to grow, and they helped them. And of course, we are now in the fifth. We don't have directions yet. So the whole world, we would want socially and environmentally sustainable post-COVID boom, and that would require these directions: digital, green, fair, and global growth. Will we do it? Well, the thing is that we know that markets function best when given a synergistic direction for innovation and investment. So we should. The framework for shaping a technological revolution is built by tilting the playing field to guide markets with the new paradigm. So for each direction, we have policies shaping the context and missions indicating goals and dates. So taxes, tariffs, protection, support, demand, etc. Infrastructure, education, skills, science and technology, technical services, etc. And regulation, norms, conditionalities, laws, etc. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 7 missions, whatever, indicating goals and dates. And this provides the institutional framework, or rather the other way, we have to set up an institutional framework that's capable of handling all those policies, of handling them properly. And what happens when you have missions is that you create ad hoc public-private coalitions. And similar shaping processes can occur at the local, regional, national, and supranational level. So we're really talking, and in this particular revolution, this multi-level perspective is very important to understand because we can go right down to the local level and do industrial policy at that level, and we need some agreements that are very important at the global level too. So let's see some examples of important historical missions. In the third surge, the age of heavy engineering, the British Empire wanted, as I told you before, to keep the empire moving under their pound sterling. They actually got a transoceanic telegraph cable around the globe, never touching land outside the empire. Can you imagine these gigantic ships putting these incredibly long cables in the ocean across continents? Well, they did it. About 1902, I think they finished it. The developing countries of the time, Germany and the US. Germany wanted to become a naval power like Britain, constructing powerful advanced ships, including submarines. That's what they did in the First World War, of course. And the US, a railway connecting coast to coast for a single market. They did this much earlier, just before the third surge. Actually, one could say that they did this in the second surge. A network of universities for education, research, and extension services for industry and agriculture. What the federal government had was land. All those things that they bought or they took away, they took with war, that land they gave both to the railways and to the universities so that they could make money with it and use it for their purposes. That was one way of very important way of helping. In the fourth surge, the age of oil and mass production, we have the post-war reconstruction. The UK set up a national health service for all very early on, actually, even during the war, there was the paper designing it, and to construct extensive public housing, whereas the whole West, including the UK, set up the welfare state or construct road and highway system and provide utilities for mass suburban home building. So these were part of the missions within the direction of suburbanization and the direction of Cold War. The US, the atom and hydrogen bombs, that was actually at the beginning hot war, the man on the moon, and to secure worldwide communications, the internet was actually a military project, of course. So missions will be different when countries are catching up, forging ahead, or being the leader. But major national projects rarely happen without an entrepreneurial state. Can we get to smart, green, fair, and global golden age? I'll give you some examples of possible policies and outcomes for smart. Flip VAT, tax materials, energy, and transport rather than labor and profits. Exonerate services, that should turn products into services, like we've done already with film and music and books. And also to produce locally, if you tax transport. So we could have food around the cities and all sorts of other interesting things. For green, increase cost of materials and energy through taxes, tariffs, or whatever, or the obligation on producers to take waste products back. So we could have energy and materials conservation, which is one of the best ways to reduce energy consumption and to make it green, not don't consume. Make long-lasting products, set up rental and maintenance economy. For fair, full access to education, universal basic income cradle to grave. You could get improved jobs, wages, and conditions, and a real safety net for all, including women working at home. For global, Marshall Plan for green development, we could fund it by a global financial transactions tax. And that would lead to design and production of sustainable capital goods and engineering in the advanced world for all these. So it will be like, almost like consumer mass production of capital goods for the world. And for growth, well, all that, plus major public projects, missions. So that would lead to innovation and public-private cooperation. It can all be done harnessing the power of digital technologies and all the new ones also that are in gestation, the biotechnologies and all those things. Remember, technology sets the stage, but does not determine the outcome. But institutional innovation requires self-modernization too. Successful companies have redesigned their organizations to take advantage of the new technologies and the new paradigm. Well, governments must also adapt their own structure to fit their new roles. Recruiting or providing the new skills, training their personnel, bringing strong people in, and aiming for the highest effectiveness and the best service. The ICT paradigm enables decentralization, empowerment, and creativity. And that is a big challenge for the legacy institutions accused of bureaucracy, understood as just, lots of rules and so on. We have to get a modern bureaucracy, super effective and super competent, more competent than the private sector. So the socio-political shaping and adoption of new technology requires a deep understanding of its paradigm and detailed knowledge of its potential, both beneficial and threatening. You can't shape something you don't understand. You've got to know it. We've got to know what can be done. And that's also the only way to regulate, by the way. So the more we know about it, the more likely it is that we will get the best possible socio-economic results. Thank you, and back to Tamsin.
Thank you, Carlota, who has finished early, which is amazing. Thank you all for joining us. We've got a lot of time now for questions. I think we've got 25 minutes for questions. So I'm going to read, the first is from Sonia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Televic, who asks, can different roles for governments and markets be clearly differentiated at different stages of technological revolutions, and how can these be operationalized? And at the moment, while we're building up the questions, I'm just going to let you answer a question at a time, and then we'll see if we need to get to the stage of asking multiple questions in a row.
Okay, that's a good question, actually, whether it's important to define what the public sector should do and what the private sector should do. I think one of the most important things is that we need to reach consensus. And one of the things we don't have are institutions capable, designed to achieve consensus. And that means all the stakeholders and stakeholders in the nation. So, we need to incorporate civil society. We don't really have those things. The Swedish government in the fourth surge in the 50s and 60s had a wonderful system where per industry they would have business, government, and labor sitting together and actually deciding which companies were more successful and higher productivity, and getting rid of the ones that weren't, and then helping those companies do something. It's an amazing experience, which I think we should all look at. So in order to take decisions such as those, which should never be taken by some top government taking decisions, this is what we'll do and this is what we want, we need to get to a point where we can design the way to take decisions. That is part of the new institutional framework. And then, yes, that question and many other questions will have to be solved and if the private sector is behaving very badly, it's obvious that at some point you just have to say, well, that's enough, we take over.
I'm going to interrupt with Sonia's second part of the question, which I think is worth answering while you're on this topic. In your view, what's the role of academia for getting to the global golden age? Quickly, because you've already answered one question and we've got a lot to get through. But
well, academia up to now, during these 40, 50 years, has somehow fallen into this free market thing where at least the economics profession has fallen into the free market trap. And I think we are now trying to develop from academia a new way to look at the whole relationship between government, technology, markets, and all these things. So the first thing is to get good theory going. And the second thing is to get off the chairs and make contact with reality, work with the policymakers, work with civil society, work with the labor unions, work with whoever needs to have a stake in the future. And then academia will be much more relevant. Stop doing all those little piddly number modeling things. Go make theory and make a change. Help make a change.
Okay, the next two questions I'm going to ask together. The first is from Mariana. I'm sorry for everybody, I'm mangling your names. Epikoko. And the second from Stavroula Dimitriadis. And Mariana asks, thank you very much for this presentation. What do you think about policies aimed at reducing high consumption lifestyles? Can it be a solution for both environmental problems and inequality? And Stavroula asks, can our economies be based on green growth, or is it not possible? Others talk about degrowth, saying that the planet can't provide for more growth. So both questions asking, can we reduce high consumption? What about degrowth? Is green really an option at where we are now?
Well, I want to begin by saying that I don't think that degrowth is the solution, basically because it's not the rhythm of growth that's the problem. It's the nature of growth. It's the distribution of its fruits. What we're really angry about, and that's what the degrowth people want with very good intentions, is that all the effort should be done for the well-being of everybody. And since up to now, growth has been very much divisive and making, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, then let's stop growth because that's how the rich get richer. We're going to be poorer anyway. So somehow there is something in there. There is a premise that I don't think is the best. I believe that the only way to get the millions of people that are in poverty now is to grow, but to grow with in a new way. The nature of growth, the technologies we use, the goals we have. So we need sustainable, green, socially sustainable, environmentally sustainable growth. So then, is it possible to have people change their lifestyles? Yes, of course. People have changed their lifestyles 4 times already. I mean, every revolution changes lifestyles. And the reason, haven't we already changed our lifestyles by using mobile phones for music and films and books and reading and talking and communicating? That's a big change in our lifestyle. Lots of people are now vegan. Lots of people, it happens. The whole process of technological change is also a process of desire change. We change our desires as new things appear, and we understand a different way of fulfilling our needs and a different set of needs. We change our needs too. But of course, it doesn't happen automatically. It has to be the ones who have the power have got to do it. So government has got to change. I mentioned just now the idea of durable goods. If companies have to take back, this whole planned obsolescence thing, which is part of what growth, the bad old growth has to do with planned obsolescence. So we destroy, we throw everything out. A refrigerator doesn't last more than 3-4 years. And if something goes wrong, we buy another one because it's too expensive to maintain. We could create hundreds of thousands of maintenance jobs if we were to force companies to take back their products, in which case they would no longer want to sell them. If they have to take them back, they would hand them over to rental companies. Those rental companies would then have maintenance. All companies would be forced, there would be an obligation to put on the web all the parts so that they can be 3D printed, so that if anything goes wrong, then the rental company will come in with all this personnel, which is fixing and so on. And you can forbid, nobody can throw any electrical appliance in the municipal garbage bin place or whatever. So there are many things that can be done, but it's got to be a goal. You've got to want to do it. You don't do it. You don't think of ways of making it better, easier, less costly, more desirable to live in a greener way. And of course, companies, as soon as they discover that people want green, and you know, companies are now announcing this is without this and without this other chemical, and this is, responsibly sourced, and it's already written on the business adverts because they understand that they're trying to fulfill. So we need that to grow, basically. And if it goes faster and faster, we will be able to grow in a green and sustainable, socially sustainable way. And, you know, capitalism is only legitimate if the wealth of a few makes the life better for all the others. So we need to get there. Otherwise, they're in trouble.
I'm going to Fausto and Edmund. I'll get to your questions in a minute. I'm going to follow that with a question from Sophia Prudencio. And Sophia asks, thank you so much, Carlota and Tamsin. Could you share some ideas regarding how to tackle lock-in factors that lead to path dependence, which could delay and even prevent the expansion of new technologies and the sort of moves that you were talking about, Carlota, that society needs to work towards? So ideas for tackling lock-in factors that lead to path dependence.
That's not easy. And it depends in each case. You know, as a general thing, I don't think anything could be done to stop lock-in. But in particular things, definitely. I mean, even norms, you know, there's a whole range. Almost every industry has a whole set of norms and regulations that are official. In some cases, they participate in creating the norms. And of course, if we could have a system by which you would have a consensus building thing where you have the users, the consumers, the producers, the suppliers, the government, and anybody who could be affected, if we could have that.
Fausto, who is a PhD student here, asks, how would you reconcile the cartel-friendly system of the German tradition with the need for creative destruction of market competition? Thank you, Carlota.
The thing is that cartels don't start from the beginning. Cartels happen when it's already obvious that competition is hurting. The original competition, nobody knows which way it's going to go. But once there is a sort of basic model that everybody's following, and they're only fighting for the leadership, that's when cartels are necessary. So, I mean, that's when it has happened historically. I don't know if you could have a sort of cartel organization of startups or people who are just beginning, or when the technology is not yet mature, or I think it happens in different moments. And the question is, when the moment comes, is it good to allow it or is it bad? Because cartels, you know, I think we should have cartels of all materials now, because we need to do something, but a cartel that includes both consumers and producers. But that's very complicated. I think we have to think more about it and discuss with some specialists. But collaboration can be very good. It can, of course, be very bad. So we need, in each case, and also in under, you know, in which period we're in, what the consequences could be. The question of monopoly is a serious question, but at the same time, right now we have almost single monopoly, you know, true monopolies, not even oligopolies, because cartels are generally a form of oligopolistic competition because they do compete anyway. So yes, my answer again is we need to sit down together and discuss the whole thing in each case.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. I'm going to ask, I think this is very interesting, from Carl Sorensen. Carl asks, hasn't the private property paradigm been what has driven much of the widespread benefits from this linear growth model of industrialization? By owning your car, your house, etc., that gives you security against economic trouble. If we transition to a rental economy, how do we steer the economy to not further exacerbate inequalities and put the already vulnerable in a particularly precarious position in case of economic downturn?
Wow. That I had never thought about. But could basic income be a little bit of a thing, or pre-distribution of some? I mean, maybe we have to think more broadly the whole thing. But the truth is that it had never occurred to me that the rental economy, which I think will give access to people, you know, one of the things I always think is that if products could last 100 years and still be working fine, then it could be that you could rent a refrigerator for £1 a month, you know, because that's, you know, in the lifespan of that refrigerator, it's made enough money that it could then just make sure that it's part of this. So I was always on that corner of the argument, you know, how do we make everybody be able to? But I now think that the most important possession is education. So somehow I think what we need is to make sure that everybody has enough education to not be left out. And but I think it's a very good question, and I'll think some more about it. And I'm sorry I don't have an answer yet, but thank you very much for asking it.
Okay, we still do have time for maybe 3 more questions. I've got a couple here. Paul Smith asks, how do we achieve green growth in the time frame we need to in a system that prioritizes shareholder value over everything else? It seems that policy aims to force consumers and small companies to carry the burden and make the sacrifices.
Yes, by changing the conditions. That's the only way, but taking it seriously. We're not taking it seriously. I mean, it's all nice little declarations and so on, but it's not happening. So yeah, there are all sorts of problems. I think we just have to, governments have to take it seriously. I guess we need to move from populism to true developmentalism, where we're really worried about the well-being of the world, the well-being of the planet, the well-being of society, and that's not what governments are being moved by. And you know, it's not easy, but maybe social movements could give a hand.
And then this is linked to Giovanni's question. Giovanni Senga asks, which kind of institutional innovations do you think can help to adapt decision-making processes to our society, which is dominated by digital technologies? So you're saying, you know, we need to act. What kind of institutional innovations do you think can help? And Giovanni says, you refer to the Swedish model that may be linked to the mass production paradigm. Do you already see existing good examples which suits more the current paradigm? So particularly institutional innovations to adapt decision-making processes.
You know, I don't think there are that many, but there are some interesting signs. There is the B corporations. There is the, I mean, in the financial world and in the business world, there is already a realization that they are not loved, that there is a lot of resistance, that they've got to do something. So they start talking about stakeholder capitalism. And there is the ESG movement, which is now entering also the financial world. And so there are some of those things that say we need all stakeholders to be involved, or at least all stakeholders to benefit, to be taken into account. So that, I think, is one very, very sort of minor beginning, but it is there. And it's important to know that the tide is turning, that it's no longer obvious to everybody that, you know, that business and markets will do everything and the government should be out of the way. I mean, just the COVID was so wonderful. The only good thing about COVID is that it made everybody realize that they all depended on government. Business came and asked government to help, and everybody, I mean, I don't think governments are going back to being just on the side. It was important, and it's going to happen. How we will organize. I think the first thing we have to do is to know that we have to find ways of organizing. I have a couple of examples, but I realize that giving you the previous example, I probably eliminated 3 possible questions because it takes time to explain an example. But anyway, any sort of organization that gets the stakeholders together to put everything on the table and to try to find a consensus solution, which is not easy because interests can sometimes be really opposed to each other. So you have to give in some part. Nobody can get everything they want, not even the big companies. So yeah, think about it, decide that we have to do it, and it would be great to collect examples of places where I'm sure it has happened in several places, but I'm not aware.
Okay, we've just got a few minutes. I am going to take the prerogative of asking the final question, but I'd like to thank Nora and Tamsin, who's not me, I'm Tamsin, over in the comms department for putting this on and hosting it for us. Carlota, my question to you is, there are lots of scholars now that put forward the idea that this revolution, whichever one it is different in kind to the revolutions that have come before. What would you say to people that say, well, there's AI, it's not the same, we can't make up the jobs? What would you say to that? And you've got precisely 3 minutes to answer, and then I'm going to close the session down. Thank you everybody for attending and for all your questions today. Go.
Okay, the first thing I would like to say is that I have no doubt that this revolution is different, but it's different only precisely in those things that people are picking up, which are, number one, that it covers a new space. Mental work was never really mechanized. We're talking now about mechanization of mental work. And that means both robotics and artificial intelligence and so on. So that's one thing. The second thing, this is the most global of globalizations. The previous globalization, you know, it incorporated several countries. It's nothing compared to this one. This is really, really affecting everybody. In the furthest village, you have people with a mobile phone in their hands. This is really a global paradigm. So that means it's expanding, you know, in many, regionally, geographically, very much. So those 2 major differences, I think, make it a different revolution. But what is the basis of the explanation of what we are understanding as revolutions? It's not the nature of the technology only. It is the fact that we are in a market economy. And being in a market economy, in order to get so many people to do things that are more or less synergistic and more or less going in similar directions so that they come together into a way of life and a way of producing and so on, so you get the right suppliers for everybody and so on, you need to have a common paradigm. You need the set of technologies to be more or less interconnected. And as they are interconnected, then you get a market society. The whole thing is that because we're still in a market society, this revolution will also behave in a similar way. First, destroying the previous mess, whatever it is that's already mature, then experimenting across the board, then choosing among those things, either being chosen by governments or being chosen by business. Right now, the military, finance, they're the ones who are deciding in which direction this paradigm goes. And finance is, you know, all these more and more games, now the metaverse, and how about all the problems of society? Every technological revolution needs to solve the problems of people. It's all about people. So to solve the problems that have to do with shelter, with food, with, you know, everything that's important, they're going away and away and away, and now to the metaverse, so we can forget about all our problems and dreams somewhere. I think we need to get those people on board, and that will make the difference. But that is how technological revolutions move. So even if this is a different one in terms of its nature, even if it's different in terms of its scope, this is a market economy. And let me tell you something. The Soviet Union was not a market economy, but they used the technologies developed in the market economy, Ford's and all the others, and they actually bought it. Ford had a 7-year contract, and they had hundreds of thousands of people from the West going to Russia to help them build the electricity networks, the mass production assembly lines, and all these things. And that's how they were very successful, and they picked it up very well. And the government, by the way, forging ahead always requires governments from the beginning. You don't have, that's what happens in the US and Germany, like I told you, governments help in the forging ahead or catching up phase. Well, the Soviet Union got to the point where, like everybody else, where mass production became mature. You could no longer continue along that path. They got computers from the West, they got a few things, but they didn't have the internal mechanism to make a revolution. They couldn't do creative destruction. They couldn't do excitement about this thing because everything was state controlled. So what happened? They just collapsed into nothingness. It disappeared. It didn't, there wasn't even a social revolution, nothing. So that it's the market system that does it.
That was too good, but it was a long, but it was a good answer. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Carlota, for speaking to us. And hopefully some of you will be able to join us at the next MOIN meeting. I'm hoping that maybe some of the other Beyond 4.0 partners will be able to talk to you about their research on the future of work and welfare next time. Thanks, everybody.